In this video we're going to take a quick look at how to make a simple hinge like this. I'm not going to bother decorating them, I'll do that in a subsequent one. We can look at how to make fancy ends out of them. This would be an internal hinge, so there's no requirement for all of that fancy work there. Just need to make it safe. So I'm going to take a look now at how I make the hinge mechanism in the workshop with the tools that I have. There are undoubtedly different and various ways of doing them, but as long as you end up with a hinge that works and moves nicely, then it's mission success. So firstly I'm going to take a strip off of the end of this. This is 18 gauge steel. It's about 1.2 or so mil. This is just mild. You can make hinges from high carbon steel and do them from whatever you fancy really. I'm just going to cut though a 3/4 inch strip off the end of this. I'm just going to mark it with a tool. Now when you make the cut, it's important you keep them relatively straight along that line. It's not vital because the hinge is only a small portion of it. If you want to sort of see where you're going a bit later, you can add in a pen line there simply all the way down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut that off. Obviously an automatic set of cutters, automatic shear. You can use hand cutters like this, relatively cheap, just takes a bit longer, or if you're equipped you've got things like guillotines and so on. It's quite easy. But basically at the end of the day you just need that strip. I'm using 3/4 inch there, which I'll pick up off the floor in a moment, and we'll straighten it out and we'll get to the next phase of making our hinges. So I've just straightened that out. I got the kinks out of it. I've got a little curve in there I'm not bothered about, and I've also cleaned the surface back to a 120 grip, just because once you fold these over it's difficult to get any rust marks off of them, and that's good enough really to be able to buff back later. So the first part of the stage I just take a soft facing hammer like this one. It's a plastic one. Rawhide will do just as well. I've got one here, but my rawhide's a little bit heavy because it's got this weight in there, so I prefer to use this plastic hammer. And all I do is just offer it up about an inch, 3/4 inch over the edge of the anvil. It doesn't really matter at this stage. You don't want too much material because it will be a waste. You don't want too little because it's impossible to move later. But so I found about an inch on small hinges like this going in a van brace, tucked away in there, work totally adequately. And just push it down to 90 degrees. So I'm keeping it straight. I'm using this as my gauge. Push it over with a tap and put it back. Nice and easy. We've just closed that over just like that. Then we move on to the next stage. I want to make gauntlets. I tend to use normal nails inside just to hold the leather work together, the leather and the metal together, and you end up with these large offcuts from the nails. And I tend to keep these then for the hinges. They work really well. So what I'm going to do is just insert that into there. Now at the moment it can fall clean out and it can be a bit fiddly. What I'll do is put that in there and just try and tamp it in. There we go, so that's held in place. Give it a flip over, and we're taking that just beyond the edge of the anvil there and just give it a couple of taps. And that's cinched that in now. You can see in there. What I like to do is just tidy that up with a chisel. The next part of the process I use this chisel. I think some sort of bricklayer's chisel or similar. But what I've done is I've blunted it right down so it's very smooth along that surface there. Slightly bowed just to make it a bit easier to use. It's unimportant that it's this spade shape, I just find it's worked well, so I just kept it like that. But a normal chisel will do. Just be sure to soften the edge, otherwise you'll cut the hinge. Just put the hinge in against something hard, like the surface we've got here. So we've just offered that up there, nice and gently. Take this and just tidy up the work. There we go, we're starting to see the first part of the hinge. taking shape, and just give that a couple of hits down. And like that, squares it off nicely, and that's now ready to be cut, and we can move on to the marrying one to go with it. So just give that a snip. First half of the chisel of the hinge ready to go, and we just repeat the process in quick time on this piece here. I'll just go through that now to show just how quick and easy it is to go through it in one go. About 1 inch, push over, square off. There you go, no great mystery, quite easily done and easy to manufacture. Lots of these parts ready to go. This next bit isn't a hard and fast rule, but what we're going to do is we're going to cut out a portion from the middle of this one and the ends of the other part that we made in just a minute. But generally what I've spotted on a lot of medieval hinges, not on all of them but a lot, is that they're done as if it's in 4 parts. What you have is 1 part on either end and then 2 in the centre. Like I say, it's not always like this, but more often than not, if they're about 3/4 of an inch wide, this tends to be the way they're done. Visor helmets tend to be a lot, visor hinges tend to be a lot different, with a lot more crenellations, if you like, along it. But for a van brace or a greave or so on, they tend to be done to these proportions. But don't get bent out of shape about these proportions, but you see it an awful lot, probably more than any other, certainly in my experience. And it makes for a good strong hinge as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove a portion from the middle of this once we take the nail out of the hole there that we've got running through it. So first things first, take the nails out of both of the hinge halves. Often a pair of pliers will do. Let's give it a wiggle, there we go. And they come out. If not, give it a tap on the end over a hole with a hammer and you reveal those there. So the first one we're going to do is make the female side of this. Now I just mark it with a marker pen. There we go. That's all there is to it. Now you can sit there with rulers and do all that. I don't think they did. The hinges I've handled and seen, like I said before, they range from exquisitely engineered pieces of workmanship down to something that looks like a 9-year-old has done. They just don't seem to have been too bothered in some cases, certainly in the 14th, early 15th century, with the quality of the hinge. As long as it worked well, that was considered enough. So I've just done it by eye there. I'm quite happy with that. And I'm going to remove this section now, and I'll show you how I do that. So what I've got set up here is a small vise. I'm going to drop these in just in there. I've got some vice grippers here. They're not important, they just stop this rubberized surface marring the actual hinge parts with the grips in the vice. Slumps of wood would do, or if you haven't got them, it doesn't matter that much. Just don't get carried away and grip too hard. I'm also going to be using a 1mm slitting disc in my grinder. Get nice fine cuts with these. I've bought cheap ones in the past and they just fell apart as if they were made of pencil lead that had been pressed round. So I've not found a better one than these so far, but I haven't looked too hard. My local store up the road from me supplies these. They're a good price and they last a good while. So I've just got an older one here in the grinder ready to go, and ear defenders behind, important when you're using grinders. So I'll get this set up and then I'll remove that middle section. So as square as possible, and then cut it out. So if I put this behind, there we are, you can get an idea of what you can do with the grinder. Now you could grind 2 slits and knock that out with a chisel. I just prefer to work on these smaller hinges with the grinder. And you want to set them back, the hole that you've just made, further than the end here of the hinge. Otherwise the hinge will grind against this space and won't move very freely. We don't want to go too far, otherwise it ends up looking ugly. So what I do is I tend to just finish off with a file, straight file, just to tidy things up. So here's the hinge part that we just did, the female part of the hinge, all done. That's important, even if it's just by eye, that you get these parts here as 90 degree as you can. So when the other part of the hinge is moving in there, it doesn't go off at a skewed angle. You can operate backwards and forwards nicely. Now what I do is line them up like so, and I'm going to mark out the areas we're going to remove. Be careful not to be too liberal with this. Keep it in check along here, because you can always file back by hand and get them nice and tight. So I do is hold this one down, the other's fine where it is. Again, just give it a mark where we need to go, and then you cut those out in 2 fluid actions on each side. So we've got our 2 marks. I'm going to take the disc again and cut those away, turn it through 90 degrees, then cut them off. We've cut our marks. Then what I'm going to do is tidy them up again with this flat file. And then we'll see how we get the 2 sides meeting each other. So first thing I do is take a nice fine file like this and just give everything a clean off. Get rid of all the burrs, the lumps and bumps which are on here. That'll stop it from moving smoothly within itself. Now I can see here I've got one of my cut marks that I made. You might be able to just pick that up. Just here, see if we can get closer for you. So I've got one of the cut marks that I made is visible just there. So I'm going to file that out with a bigger file than the one that I've got. Last thing I want to be able to see is machine work on this. So I want to lift that out. So press it hard down on the anvil and just work it with the file till it's gone. Be careful not to go this way too far, or you'll get straight into this male part of the hinge and mess it up. Often, this one hasn't, files have a smooth side and a rough side on that leading edge. So you can be sure not to damage it, but in this case just be careful. Last thing you want is a bit of modern grinding and machine work to be visible to ruin the look of the final piece. There we go. Give the back a touch just to get rid of that burring. Happy days. So we've cleaned up all of our edges, and just before we go putting the nail in to finish it, get a needle file and just make sure there's no burrs or muck inside the piece. The spot also, I've given it a quick clean, just down to 120 grit. Whilst it's in bits, it's a bit simpler. Clean all the dirt and the muck out than it is when it's held together. But you're going to give it a polish when it's with the armour. That'll sort that out. So just cleaning around there, around those points. Make sure you get a nice clean fluid motion. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get the nail put into these once I pick this bit up off the floor. So true to form, I hadn't pressed record and I've practically made the hinge. So now what I'll do is we'll show you how to take a hinge to pieces. I haven't peened the ends over, so just get hold of them in some pliers, pull out that bit and discard. So again then, over the hole here at the end of the anvil. Now if you don't have an anvil with these various bits and pieces, a lump of wood will do with a small hole drilled in it. A piece of metal will do, drill a 5-6mm hole in it. It just makes for a better hinge and you stand less of a chance of bending this as you're putting it into the hinges. I found this old piece of metal for about £5 from a scrapyard and it came with a load of holes already drilled in it. And it's perfect. I've no idea what it did in its previous life. You can see at the end here, if I can get that in focus. These are just holes I've drilled with about a 5mm, 4mm hole drill. Just touch them in and use those for rivet sets periodically as well. But anyway, to the hinge. Take your two hinge halves, join them together. Take your nail and start to push it in. Now, sometimes you get lucky and it will move straight down there. It's getting caught a bit, perfect. So make sure everything's lined up nicely, nice and square. Put it over the hole. More helicopters for that filming. They're not HMS Daedalus. They just touch it in. Go gentle. You don't want to bend this or the hinge won't work nicely. Hammer under its own weight. And there you go. Just work it a few times. And if you got the holes right before, it's the same size nail as the ones we were using previously. There you go. An almost finished working hinge. Take your side cutters, or if you used a grinder, cut it, but I prefer you did it with ease because you slip with a grinder or something like this, you're going to lose a finger. So take the side cutters and cut it with about 2mm either end. Doesn't need much more. Almost ready to go. To make life easier for yourself, side cutters tend to put a bit of a triangular shape at the end of the nail. What I would suggest is file those off, just touch them with something like this or with a normal file. And again, I'll be doing some product reviews in the future. This is just a power file. What I'm doing is touching these back to flat. Now once they've gone back to flat, you get a bit of a better peen on them because you're not fighting that triangle down. They can look a bit neater and a bit nicer. When you peen this, it only needs to go over a tiny amount because this is made, the holes have been made using nails this size, so you don't need to go mad and smash them down. What I've got, I showed you before, with this lump of metal, there's a series of dents that I've put in using a drill bit. And sometimes you can put those on there when you do it and it will start to peen over the other side, but it's not important. I want to show that it isn't. To get a totally adequate finish on a flat face, just touch it over on one side, flip it over, touch it down again. And there is your finished hinge. It's a bit tighter, it'll work a bit. And there you go. If you find the shanks are too long, but you've cut those a bit short after you've pinged them, this is just fine. What you can do is just touch it down again. Give it a touch. And that is how you make a hinge. When you're not explaining to camera, you can get each hinge made probably under 5 minutes. If you take more time, you can keep them nice and neat. But honestly, having handled lots of armour in museums, you go checking them out, that hinge is as neat as the normal sorts of ones you'll see. There are some exquisite versions naturally, but if you take a close look at most hinges, they are really ropey. They've probably just been worn out, but also just don't want to waste time. I would have thought back in the day making the hinges. They're just knocking them out unless it's for a particularly prestigious customer. But even so, some of those ones are really quite poor. But there you go, that's how you make a basic hinge. In another one I'll show you how to do all the decorative pieces on the end. That just involves a lot of file work and a bit of thinking. There's a little postscript to it. There's the selection of tools, less the electric tools that I use, the grinder and so on, to make this. You don't need all of these tools. You can do away with that one and do the initial pushing over the material with a small hammer like that. Just go careful. I just use the rubberized one because it means you can be a bit quicker with the movement. You could do away with the ball peen hammer and just use that one to push over at the end. The file can take the place of the grinder, but you'll be there quite a while. I would recommend a chisel. The small file, you can get away with that one. Just go gentler with this one. The needle file, if you push the nail through a couple of times, that will remove any of the burrs. So you can do away with that one. Obviously the pen to just mark things out. The side cutters are handy because they've got a nice long handle on them to get some pressure, but you can do away with that because there are in fact side cutters on most normal pliers, because they're made normally for electricians to be able to cut wire with, and they're more than adequate, and also the plier to pull bits and pieces out with. I use the electric cutter to cut the strip. Takes a bit more effort, but you can use a standard set of hand shears like this, or even a chisel. The marker at the top here, it's just nice to have. With a bit of care you can just use the ruler to keep things nice and uniformed. The chisel that I use to push things over with and get them a bit neater, you can do away with, because you can just use the edge of the anvil. Just takes a few moments longer and just have to take a bit more time. So you can see there, you don't need a particularly extensive tool set. Just need something to cut the metal, to bend the metal, to file the metal, and you're pretty much your way.